Hi, how you doing? Pony intelligence in Equestria is honestly kinda confusing. I mean, the ponies are clearly smart, maybe even smarter than humans in some ways, but then sometimes they act like they're just barely above real-world horses. We've got Twilight, a literal genius. There's almost nothing she can't understand or do. But then there's Applejack or Rainbow Dash. Not dumb by any means, but let's just say they're not cracking quantum theory anytime soon. Sure, they're way smarter than your average real-life pony, but compared to Twilight or Starlight, not even close. So, how smart are ponies really? Well, that's what we're going to try and find out in this video. Stick around to the end if you want to know the answer, or just skip ahead if you're boring, I guess. Before we get into specific characters, let's just take a step back and ask, what can we actually gather about pony intelligence overall? Well, for starters, ponies can speak, read and write fluently, which obviously puts them leagues ahead of their real-world counterparts. Both skills also suggest a certain level of emotional depth and self-awareness. I assume real ponies don't have that, although they can't talk, so who knows? Maybe they're all super geniuses trapped inside horse bodies. That was a joke. I hope. Back to Equestria. Ponies also run businesses and farms, stuff that requires lots of planning, problem solving and logistics. They've built trains, postal services, schools, hospitals, and an actual functioning monarchy. So that's it, right? Case closed. Ponies are smart. Thanks for watching, I've been Monodash, and I'll see you sometime soon. Well, not exactly. Because as much as all that makes them seem intelligent, they also act with zero common sense sometimes. Do they actually understand how their world works, or are they just kind of vibing and going with it? For example, Equestria doesn't seem to innovate much. Sure, they have powerful magic and some tech, but they still use candles, parchment, oil lamps and wagons. It's like they're stuck in the 1800s, but then you look at Manhattan, and it's clearly had some kind of industrial boom, so what's going on? And don't even get me started on science. There's no real scientific community in Equestria. Maybe they don't need it because they have magic, but it does make you wonder, how would equestrian magic compare to real world science? And just how smart would a human have to be to match a pony who's good at magic? Let's look at some ponies in more detail. Specifically, the smart ones. I'm talking Twilight, Starlight and Sunburst. Ponies who aren't just clever, they're borderline geniuses. Take Twilight for instance. Her understanding of magic is insane. We don't know exactly how equestrian magic compares to human science, but either way you'd have to be pretty smart to use it the way she does. She literally completed an unfinished spell by Starswell the Bearded, one of the most powerful unicorns in all pony history. That alone is a massive feat. She's also a crazy fast learner. She reads constantly, absorbs information like a sponge, and puts it to practical use. A great example is in Rainbow Rocks. Twilight straight up builds a device that extracts magic from a book and uses it to power an interdimensional portal. That's not just magic, that's borderline engineering, which implies that she has a decent grasp of scientific principles too. And then there's Sunburst. He's not the best at casting spells, but his theoretical understanding of magic is ridiculously deep. He's clearly studied for years, and the show makes it clear that reaching that level of knowledge takes major effort. And of course Starlight. She invented a spell to remove cutie marks, and as far as we know, that's entirely her own creation. No other pony or creature ever replicates it in the series, and outside of that, she's constantly shown to be on Twilight's level when it comes to spellcasting and learning. But here's the thing, these ponies are the exception, not the rule. Twilight, Starlight and Sunburst are really the only genius level unicorns we meet in the entire show. So while their intelligence is super impressive, it's not necessarily the standard, and even they have blind spots. Being book smart doesn't make you emotionally smart. Twilight, especially in the early seasons, is completely oblivious to basic social cues. In Look Before You Sleep, she doesn't notice the obvious tension between Applejack and Rarity. Now sure, someone might argue that this is just because she's new to friendship, but still that proves the point. She may be a magical prodigy, but emotionally, kinda clueless. Of course, she does grow. By the end of the show she's literally the princess of friendship, which only reinforces how fast she learns and adapts. But yeah, when we talk about how smart ponies are, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. So what about the non-genius ponies? Well, the first thing that jumps out when you move away from characters like Twilight is that intelligence doesn't just mean book smarts, it's more complicated than that. Take Applejack. Sure, she can read and write like any other pony, but she's not exactly cracking open spellbooks. That's not her thing though. Her intelligence is practical. She knows an insane amount about apples, farming and hands-on labour. She's basically running Sweet Apple Acres, organising the work, planning the harvest, doing the chores, fixing stuff when it breaks. She's not quoting textbooks, but she's extremely competent in her field. Same with Rainbow Dash. She's not academic at all, she doesn't care about school, and aside from daring do, she's not much of a reader. But when it comes to flying, she's a master. She understands things like speed, resistance, momentum, not in theory, but in practice. She might not write a science paper on aerodynamics, but she lives it every day. And that brings us to something I haven't talked about yet: cutie marks. A pony's intelligence is often tied to their specific talent. Fluttershy, for example, is extremely knowledgeable about animals, way more than Twilight, for example, who probably knows what she's read, but Fluttershy's expertise is specific. She doesn't know everything, but she knows critters. Twilight, on the other hand, has a much broader range. Her cutie mark symbolises magic and arguably knowledge, leadership, and even unity. It's complicated, but it means her knowledge is more general. She's not going to know as much about flying as Dash or farming as AJ, but she has a balanced, wide-reaching intelligence. So when we try to measure pony intelligence, it's kind of like comparing different RPG classes. Each pony is spec'd into a specific skill set. You wouldn't say a healer is dumber than a wizard just because they use different spells. Same with ponies. Their knowledge is customized to their role, and no one role is objectively better or smarter than others. Now, while the ponies may all be smart in their own ways, that doesn't excuse all of them from doing dumb stuff from time to time, whether it's due to a lack of intelligence or for a more complicated reason like specific character motivations. For instance, in Applebuck season, AJ refuses help that she obviously needs, which from an onlooking perspective is, not the smart thing to do, and her refusal for this help ends up messing with a lot of people in the town. However, it wasn't simply down to her being dumb, as she wanted to prove to herself and everyone around her that she could do it alone, and that blinded her from using common sense and seeing that she needed help. However, sometimes ponies are just dumb. Like the countless times when Ponyville is under threat, some ponies will just stand there screaming instead of acting. Now I'll admit this isn't unreasonable. Freeze is one of the 3 responses to danger that we get, but still, this happens so often, surely they learn to move at some point. A lot of the time, characters we follow will get so caught up in whatever goal they're trying to pursue that they'll do objectively dumb things to achieve them, like the Applebuck season example. Another example of this is in the episode Sleepless in Ponyville, where Scootaloo is really desperate to impress Rainbow Dash, so makes a series of unwise decisions that end up nearly causing her serious harm and possibly death. Of course, watching that, we can see that what she's doing isn't the smartest or most logical way to go about her goal, but she's so caught up in a crusade to impress Rainbow Dash that she doesn't think about her own well-being. And another possibly even better example of this is in Owl's Well That Ends Well, where Spike makes a series of very dumb decisions trying to get rid of Aloysius, instead of just admitting to Twilight how he felt, and eventually misunderstanding Twilight and leaving, nearly dying to a dragon. And again, watching that, we can see that Spike isn't making intelligent decisions, but he's so focused and wrapped up with the thought of being replaced by Aloysius that he stops thinking logically. So yeah, while these moments can seem like a lack of intelligence, they're often driven by emotion, impulse, or just tunnel vision. It does raise an interesting question. How does a society full of ponies making irrational or impulsive choices still manage to function so well most of the time? I mean, things usually work out in Equestria, right? Well, maybe that's because something else is quietly holding it together, and that something is magic. There are tons of other moments I haven't even mentioned where ponies act irrationally or make poor decisions, but maybe that's kind of the point. Maybe they don't need to be on point all the time because magic can just clean up the mess. Why build complicated machines or develop advanced infrastructure when unicorns can just levitate things or teleport? It's pretty much a spell for everything. Growing moustaches, duplicating stuff, you name it. And honestly, that takes a lot of pressure off ponies. If you mess up, there's probably a spell for that. It kind of reminds me of Harry Potter, where magic is also a universal shortcut. I'm going to let my film critic side show here a bit. I actually think Harry Potter kind of struggles with this. There's a spell or potion for almost every problem, and it lowers the stakes a lot. Oh no, Harry's got no bones in his arm? Don't worry, they'll grow back overnight. Personally, I find it hard to stay invested when magic always saves the day. But weirdly, in My Little Pony this doesn't have the same problem. Maybe it's because the show never leans into the idea of real irreversible consequences in the first place, or maybe it's because Friendship's Magic embraces its magical world so fully. This whole running on magic thing does pose a few questions though. Most pressingly, what about Pegasi and Earth Ponies? They don't possess magic, they can't teleport or levitate stuff, or, halve an entire field of apples in like 2 seconds. Looking at you, Twilight. This could possibly be an answer to why Equestria seems so untechnologically advanced. Since the unicorns generally seem to be the more academically smart ponies, maybe the Pegasi and Earth Ponies relied on them to create things like lights, travel infrastructure and that kind of thing, which is why they're so underdeveloped. Since the unicorns find those things so easy, they can just make their horn glow for light or teleport for transport, they couldn't be bothered to put in as much effort into the other ponies' equivalents, which is why they still use oil lamps and candles. But hey, that's just a theory, a My Little Pony theory. One more thing that really confuses me when thinking about pony intelligence is how they compare to other animals in Equestria. This kind of links back to my last video where I talked about cows, except this time I want to zoom out and consider a wider range of creatures. Last time, a bunch of you brought sheep to my attention, and honestly, they might be even more oppressed than cows. At least the cows get a chance to talk occasionally. The sheep, they can talk too, but the ponies don't seem to want them to.
You could've just asked.
They just herd them around like regular livestock. So here's the weird part. If cows and sheep are intelligent enough to speak, possibly even reach pony level intelligence, then why don't they have their own towns or societies? The buffalo do, the yaks do, so what makes cows and sheep so different? Are they just okay with being herded and treated like livestock? Or are they being actively suppressed? Honestly, I might need to make an entire video just on oppressed animals in Equestria because there's a lot to unpack there. And it doesn't just stop there. What about animals that can't speak? Are they simply less intelligent, or are they just unable to communicate in the way ponies do? Winona clearly understands commands and helps out on the farm. Aloysius can follow complex instructions and even operates independently. Angel Bunny, love him or hate him, shows clear emotional awareness. And just for sidekicks, all the pets, despite them being non-verbal, understand Spike's apology and choose to forgive him. But then again, being able to speak doesn't always mean a creature is intelligent. Dragons can speak fluently, but many of the ones we see, especially in episodes like Dragon Quest, act way less mature or thoughtful than the average pony. Spike is clearly an exception, and Ember too. She's emotionally intelligent, thoughtful, and actually a good leader, so maybe dragon intelligence is just really varied. Some are smart, and some are garble. And if we really wanted to go deep, we could talk about the Breezies, which are tiny but seem very clever and organised, versus something like the Parasprites, who are also tiny but act entirely on instinct. So now we're looking at a whole spectrum of intelligence that goes across magical species, and honestly, like ponies, every creature is different in its own way, and you can't really group them in terms of intelligence. So, with all that said, how smart are ponies really? Well, it depends. Some ponies like Twilight, Starlight, Sunburst are genuine geniuses. Magical prodigies who can crack ancient spells and build sci-fi tech out of enchanted books. Others, like Applejack or Rainbow Dash, might not be book smart, but they've got a deep practical intelligence that keeps Ponyville running and saves lives on the regular. Then there's the magic itself, which kinda throws everything off. When you live in a world where problems can be fixed with a horn zap or friendship laser, maybe critical thinking isn't just always that necessary. Maybe Equestria runs more on vibes and key marks than pure logic. And really, that's what makes answering this question so hard. Intelligence in Equestria is specialised. It's based on talent, purpose, and sometimes narrative convenience. Every pony seems smart in exactly the way they need to be, even if that means ignoring common sense every once in a while. So, are ponies smart? Yeah, just not always in the way you'd expect. Their intelligence isn't about IQ scores or big brain moves all the time, it's about function. It's specialised, often talent driven, and deeply tied to who they are as individuals. A pony might be a genius in one very specific area like magic, apples, or flying loops, but be completely clueless outside that lane. And honestly, that kinda makes sense in a world designed around destiny and cutie marks. In a way, it's like Equestria doesn't need every pony to be a perfect all-rounder, it just needs them to be the best version of themselves. Maybe that's the real brilliance of pony intelligence. Not how much they know, but how well they understand their role in the world around them. Because in the end, being smart isn't always about knowing everything. Sometimes it's just about knowing enough to make a difference. And that's a wrap for this one. I hope you enjoyed, and I did bring some conclusion to the question. I know it might not have been the definitive answer some were hoping for, and it was a bit waffly at the end, but it's just such a complicated topic, I don't feel like I could realistically give an answer like that. Just for anyone who is wondering about ranking videos, I've decided to take a different approach from them from now on. I'll do weekly video uploads, or at least try to, and work on the next ranking video in the background the whole time, so that they will take significantly longer to come out, but you guys will have a steady schedule of new interesting videos, which should hopefully make you both entertained and also excited for the next ranking videos. It won't be so similar to the last video released. And with that, thanks for watching, I've been Monodash, and I'll see you sometime soon.